Stephanie Rugoff, coordinator of We Are Not Your Soldiers, which is the project of World Can't Wait. We started the We Are Not Your Soldiers project in 2004 and have been visiting schools with veterans ever since. We primarily visit high school classes, but have done a significant number of college visits as well. During most of our visits, veterans of the current war on terror, or really the war of terror, speak of their experiences. Sometimes we're asked to come in during a study of the war in Vietnam, or to do a comparison of that war and the current wars. What stands out is the similarity in the horrific violence and brutality waged against other countries and the people in them, the racism and the concomitant effects on the speakers and their cohorts themselves. Originally envisioned as a means of convincing students not to enlist in the military and to encourage them to join the movement against the wars, that is still the basis of what we do. However, even when we visit schools or classes where few, if any, of the students plan to join up, we find that while an entire generation has grown up under a constant state of war, most of the students have only a very limited knowledge of what is going on. They are usually shocked and dismayed. Potential enlistees or not, we hope the students will share the info and outlook with their friends and family so that our visits will have a wider effect. As each presenter tells his story, we deal with both the physical, emotional, and economic effects on the members of the military themselves, as well as the larger issue of what it means to attack and occupy another country, another people. What that means in terms of your own morality and your own humanity. The number of invitations have varied over the years, depending on the degree of awareness of the wars and the forcefulness of the government's recruitment efforts, as well as the situation in the schools. A more narrowed curriculum with teachers under a lot of pressure to teach to the test and an imposing testing schedule. On the positive side, our technical capacity has grown through the use of Google Hangout and Skype, and we're now able to do visits in locations where we wouldn't have been able to go otherwise due to distance and travel expense. If anyone here is a student, teacher, professor, please invite us to your schools. Or if you have contacts with anybody in those categories, please let them know about us so that they can invite us. At the end of the presentation today, we have DVDs available that we use during some of our programs. You might be interested in showing them before we come to your class or as a follow-up to a visit, or just to do a shared viewing with friends, family, colleagues, or neighbors. Today, Joe and Lyle will tell you their stories of how they came to enlist in the U.S. military and some of the formative experiences that changed their understandings and led them to activism. Joe Ergo served in the U.S. Air Force Security Police guarding nuclear weapons and nuclear-loaded aircraft from 1966 to 70, serving all of 68 at Tan Son Nhut Air Base in Vietnam. In 1970, right after the Air Force, he joined the Vietnam Veterans Against the War and was in the Vietnam Veterans Against the War National Office for 2.5 years, later in the New York City chapter. In the national office, he helped organize the Rapid American Withdrawal, a simulated search and destroy march for 86 miles from New Jersey to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. The 1971 Winter Soldier investigation into U.S. war crimes in Vietnam, and the 1971 Dewey Canyon 3 protest when Vietnam veterans angrily threw their medals back at Congress in Washington, D.C. In August 1971, he was the first Vietnam vet to go to North Vietnam on a peace mission. Lyle Jeremy Rubin is a PhD candidate in American history at the University of Rochester. He served in the U.S. Marine Corps for 5 years, with nearly a year of that service in Helmand Province in Afghanistan. We'll begin with Joe, then Lyle will speak, and then after we'll open the floor to your questions.
Can I just ask a question prior? So as you're speaking to us, would this be how you would be speaking to a class?
Yes,
In other words, that would be your,
yeah,
Ready?
yeah.
What I hope to do today, I'm going to read because it's easier for me to get through 10 or 15 minutes if I just read exactly what I have prepared. What I hope to do today is challenge you to think about what the U.S. military does in the world today so you can make an informed decision about whether you should join the U.S. military. I will not do that by talking about my history, my time in Vietnam, or what I found. No, I will do that. Sorry, I will do that by talking about my history, my time in Vietnam, and what I found when I did my own research into the U.S. military and U.S. history. How many people have relatives and friends that were in the past, now, or have today, are serving in the U.S. military? In Vietnam, in Iraq and Afghanistan, and are thinking of going in the military today? That's a very big question when you go into a school and you raise this, especially in working class communities, and you see how many hands go up. And that's why the question is very important to put that out there. Yes, there's a long history in so many people's families of military service. The challenge for me today is not easy. I know I'm going up against much of what you believe to be true and what you are told to believe every day, thousands of ways. Television, video games like Call of Duty, posters in the subway, Veterans Day parades, and more importantly, what your family and friends have told you and not told you about their time in the military. It does not matter that much if today you think you won't go in, because many of you are facing the same choices I faced 50 years ago. I can get a job, training in a career of my choice. I can serve a worthy cause, defending the nation I grew up in and the people, freedom and democracy. I can help out my parents financially. I can get out of the house and away from my family. I can see the world, travel, meet interesting people, adventure. What else am I going to do? It's a good way to start living my life. Well, the truth is that no matter what you think, the U.S. military does not care about any of those reasons. They will promise you whatever they have to get you to do to enlist and then do with you what they want. What they want is killers. Yes, very simply, they need you to go around the world and kill the people of the world. You already know this. Because behind all the propaganda and posters, the news is filled every day with the stories of U.S. troops somewhere in the world killing people. Very important. What I say here today can be compared to Iraq and Afghanistan vets' experiences, and if you look beneath all of this propaganda anywhere the U.S. military is in the world. So let's start with what happened to me. I grew up conservative, middle class, Catholic in Queens. I was a member of the Young Americans for Freedom in high school. I worked for Barry Goldwater when he ran for president. I even worked for William Buckley when he ran for mayor after high school. I got my draft notice. Back then, most youth, especially the poor and middle class, were drafted. I went in with all of those reasons I said earlier, with the added one that Vietnam was my generation's cause and that I could not go. I went into the Air Force. I wanted air intelligence as a career, photo mapping from planes on high. I survived basic training, which in the Air Force was mild, compared to the viciousness and brutality that the Army and the Marines put our youth through. In the security police, I was essentially forced to go into the security police after basic training, and I ended up guarding nuclear weapons in the United States, both before and after Vietnam. I arrived in Vietnam the day after Christmas 1967. I was not in combat, but I was in the only unit on my base that was carrying weapons. I was in the sector that was patrolling the west end of the base, and it was that base that the Vietnamese attacked at Tet. Because 1 month later, after I got there, we went to post one night, and you have to imagine, everybody's standing around, we got our rifles on, we're getting ready to go out to post. We're all pumped up, bragging, itching for a fight so we can kick ass. This is, you can see this in the movies, and this testosterone is pumping because these guys are all full of this nonsense, including me. The Vietnamese attacked my base, killing 4 of my friends, and it was on my 21st birthday, and my life changed. I just turned 21 2 days before or something. Every day, everything I believed in about what I had been taught about U.S. history, our way of life, the military, my religious training, politics, everything began to fall apart that night. And I had to investigate every belief and rebuild my own identity. Why do I say that? My friends died and I asked why. At first I could not believe that what I was hearing on the radio was so much confusion and no one seemed to know what they were doing. Okay, this is combat, it happens. But the grass and the lighting around the base allowed the, quote, enemy to hide better. Okay, I thought, that's bureaucracy, incompetence, it happens. The officers with their attitudes and arrogance lived in better quarters than the GI. Okay, military again. At the base exchange, the store on base, millions and millions of dollars of stereo equipment was coming in from Japan, and we were buying it and shipping it home. I shipped in, I spent very little, and I sent a huge military set of stereo equipment home. Okay, that's America, and it's what we do, consume. But no one could answer why my friends died and the base was attacked several more times, and it got quite confusing. I was meeting Army troops coming through my base, combat troops, and no one was positive about their mission, and they were very bitter and angry. And then I went into Saigon, and I saw the poverty and the suffering of the Vietnamese, and realized that we weren't here to help these people. It was something else, and I realized it was about business. It's what I thought at first. I spent the rest of my year angry about what I was discovering, as I noticed a growing rebellion amongst the GIs in my unit, debating politics, the mission, why the officers were harassing us, and then I saw the racism in myself and all around me in Vietnam. Gooks, dinks, zipperheads, gook food, gook kids, and widespread prostitution everywhere. Drug use everywhere. The black GIs in my unit were protesting the racism from whites. When Martin Luther King was killed that night on my base, a whole section of the bar on base blew up. Not physically blew up, but erupted into fights between the whites and the blacks. Nothing made sense until I learned from the black guys in my unit that they had no anger about the Vietnamese and were not down with the mission. And now I began to discover that there were reasons why we were there, and they were there not because of what I had been taught. When I saw pictures from the 1968 Democratic Convention of people being beaten in the streets of Chicago for protesting the war, I began to cross sides, not carrying ammunition, and decided the Vietnamese were not my enemy anymore. Something else was afoot, and I was not exactly sure what that was. In particular, I really want to acknowledge and honor the black guys in my unit who not only struggled with me around saluting the flag, because they wouldn't do it at the movie showings, and I was one of the people that did do it, and based on those debates and arguments with them, I changed my mind, and me and a friend of mine were the only two white guys to not start saluting the flag also. And these black guys in my unit were talking about coming home to join the Black Panthers and to make revolution. And that was really a challenge to me, because I was beginning to get the picture that there was a whole lot more than the simple way I had been raised to live. After I came home, I joined the Vietnam Veterans Against the War. I was one of the organizers of the Winter Soldier investigation, which in particular is very important, and the text of it is online, but you can also buy the film, the DVD. And in there, you have 125 combat veterans testifying for 3 days about the incredible brutality and viciousness that we brought down on the Vietnamese people, including the killing of children, the rape, constant rape of women, the defoliation of the land. It was just extensive. And after those hearings, I went into those hearings thinking I knew what was going on, even at that point, and it was devastating to me to really get the picture of how profoundly the United States is destroying people and countries all over the world. And then in April 1971, we threw our medals at Congress, and there you had, for several hours in an afternoon, about 1,000 veterans walked up to the streets of the Capitol, and that was a very different time. This is 50 years ago, and I think for a lot of youth, This is kind of like, nobody's ever heard this before. But you had veterans lining up, throwing their medals at Congress and saying, I got a Purple Heart here and I hope I get another one fighting these motherfuckers. And another one saying, we don't want to have to fight again, but if we have to fight, it'll be to take these steps. That was the tenor of the times of the growing political and even revolutionary movement and spirit in those times. In '71, I made a trip to Hanoi, and that's where I discovered the Vietnamese people and their culture and history in a way that I'd never understood before. You know, you're raised and you don't know anything about the countries you're invading, but when you go and you actually meet the people and meet the revolutionary leaders and the people in a country that's being bombed by the United States with their 2,000-year history of culture and resistance to invasion, this is where I really, in a really profound sense, changed sides. What I've learned is that we do not live in a country. We live in an empire that has wide reaches into almost every country on the globe. That the clothes we wear, the food we eat, and the flowers we buy for friends all come from countries around the world where people live in horrific conditions, making all the stuff for us that we're wearing, and you know, everything in our life is being, in this age of globalization and empire, is being made by people from around the world and imported for us to buy. And when those people get out of line and begin to organize and protest and rebel, the U.S. military might backs up their dictator or president, and sometimes the situation gets so bad that you and I, and this is how I speak to the kids, that you and I are needed to go invade that country and kill those people. And yes, there are bad people in many countries who do terrible things to their own people and others. But to be clear, the U.S. military does not go anywhere in the world, and it never has in 200 years. It never has, probably except for the American Civil War, to help the people. It goes for strategic and political reasons, and it can't do that without you and I believing their lies. And that's why I'm here today with We Are Not Your Soldiers. And my last note is that I have here a poster that's put out by the Vets for Peace chapter in Seattle, Washington. And it's a document that shows a graphic way of showing the 700 to 1,000 U.S. military bases that ring the globe. The U.S. has 7 bases in Colombia. You ask yourself why? Well, this documents, you know, the importance that the U.S. puts on that empire and their need to propagandize the people with the constant Wounded Warrior campaign on television, the constant, two weeks ago, last week was the military all over the streets of New York. And in Prospect Park in Brooklyn, they had a display of tanks, and they brought replicas of real guns, and they handed them out to the kids to play with. And this went on and goes on constantly, and they walk the streets of our high schools. And that's why we need We Are Not Your Soldiers to go in there and pose a moral and political choice to the youth. So they go in based on making a conscious decision, not because somebody's promising them a job someplace else. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.